black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and this is part two of a two-part show that I'm discussing based on a book that many of you might not have heard of. It would be nice if a lot of you've heard of this book, but this is what I do here at the Umoja Circle. And for those of you who are new to the Umoja Circle, it's an African-centered talk show where I try to correct errors where errors are found, and introduce facts where I find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And I try to use historical documentation in order to prove that point. Because in order to understand the present, you must understand the precedent. I mean, what came before, to understand why things are the way they are today. And then also will show you that a lot of things have not changed. And we are complaining about how America is today and the kind of people that are in the presidency today. But I want to let you know that when you read this book, Force into Glory, and when I introduce you to some of the things that is in that book, you will understand that what was said in the 1860s by Abraham Lincoln about black people and how he talked about black people is nothing new than compared to what was said today. In fact, it was even worse, okay? We must confront the historian that wrote this book first. I wanted to introduce you to this individual. His name is Bennett, and he worked with he was a senior editor at Ebony magazine, and many of you, I talk about his work and his life. You can watch it in the first part of this show. But this is a great scholar. He wasn't, like I said earlier, he was not just a writer, he was a disruptor of comfortable narratives. He spoke the truth, a true historian. A man who dares to ask, what if the story we've been told is incomplete about Lincoln? And he used a document that he found, congressional records. He found his speeches. He found contemporaries who wrote about what was told to them by Lincoln, and gave you a different picture than the great emancipator, the person that is often cast in marble and humble and a friend of black people. He was not a friend of us. He wanted to get rid of us. He wanted us to be deported out of this country. That's not what you heard in history, but you hear it here in the myth that you hear in school, but you hear it here at the Umoja Circle. So let's continue where I left off. This is going to be part two about Lincoln, and I hope you all look at part one to understand what brought me to this point, and it will be informative for sure. But this is where I left off. Bennett cataloged Lincoln's repeated statements of affirming white superiority and denying social and political equality, arguing that this was not mere political positioning, but sincerely held belief by Lincoln. He was a racist, okay? He was not this humble, loving politician. He had the ideologies of what you will find in MAGA today. Let's put that straight. Let's go on to the next one, that blacks and whites cannot be together. He notes Lincoln's use of racist language, jokes, and casual deployment of slurs to illustrate that he shared the racial prejudices of most of his white contemporaries, okay? This is Lincoln, okay? Lincoln declarations that he was opposed to black suffrage, that's voting, intermarriage, black and white men and black women, or black women, black men and white women. That was a no-no for him. And social equality, that he believed in a permanent racial hierarchy with white people on top, a caste system. I've said many times in many other shows in the past that the Constitution of 1787 created a caste system. Okay, it's not a hierarchy, it was a caste. Where we weren't even 3/5 of a human being. So we were definitely in a lower caste, and Lincoln followed that tradition. Instances cited by Bennett were where Lincoln used the derogatory language or dismisses abolitionists, okay? He did not like abolitionists. He was totally against them, okay? He had a lot of choice words for them too, as a lot of the white Americans had at that time. Let's go on to the, Bennett claims these were not marginal comments, but a pattern across decades, again, which makes post-war portrayals of Lincoln as a racial egalitarian deeply misleading. We were lied to, in other words, after his death and his assassination. That's why the book was titled Forced into Glory, this mythology of the great emancipator, Father Lincoln, and all this stuff that we were taught in school going into the later part of the 1800s, into most of the 20th century, okay? This was myth. This is the true reality of what we had to deal with, okay? He did write some laws, well, attempted, because the Emancipation Proclamation didn't do anything. But from the way he was shaped, you would think that he freed everybody. No, it was just a political thing, a wartime act that did nothing for black people. Let's go on to the next. Bennett asserts in this book that Lincoln was a longtime advocate of colonization, removing black people from the United States, and that if Lincoln had his way, there would be no blacks in America. Y'all were never taught this in school, but this is what Lincoln thought. He equates Lincoln colonization scheme with a form of ethnic cleansing, arguing that Lincoln consistently framed black presence in the U.S. as a problem to be exported, to get rid of, okay? He wanted to get rid of us. Again, how many of you have been taught that in school? You were taught the myth, okay? Let's go on to the next one. This is one of this is documented, okay, in White House records. Okay, in 1862, the White House meeting and colonization. On August the 14th, 1862, Lincoln invited a small delegation of black leaders from the Washington, D.C. area to the White House. This is the first time black men were allowed to come to the White House in D.C., okay, August the 14th in America. First president to do that. But did he come to congratulate them or to honor them? This is what he was talking about. We'll go on. The first publicly announced meeting of a U.S. president with black people in the White House, okay? But what did he talk to them about? Let's go on to the next one. In that meeting, Lincoln explicitly told them that he believed black and white people could not live together in the United States on terms of equality and urged them to promote voluntary black immigration. That's what he called them, these people to come, to Central America or elsewhere. This was his dream. Okay, this is what he constantly tried to push. And he had the audacity to bring black leaders, okay, and tell them, forget about the hundreds of years of your back-breaking work. I will, get your people to get them to get out of here. Of course, he was ignored by these black men. Not all, but a whole lot of folks said, this is our country too, okay? Let's go on to the next one. He argued that the presence of black people was at the root of the Civil War. This is what he's telling black men and women in 1862. Implied that separation was the most expedient way to peace and asked them to go back to their communities and advocate colonization. This was his plan. Many historians describe this meeting as the moral low point of his presidency. Really, really, really. Okay, like I said, he would be a great MAGA Republican today with this type of mentality, okay? Let's go on to the next. This is some of the things that he actually did, okay, when it comes to colonization. Not only told these men that he want them to encourage their people to do that. I don't know how it would go all through the country, but he had this idea: colonization, removing black people from the U.S. to places like, this is what he was thinking. Okay, let's go to Liberia, okay, which was a colony founded in earlier 1800s by a black enslaved people who left America in there. But they volunteered to do that in the country of Liberia today. Send them to Central America or to the Caribbean was a long-standing white political project, and Lincoln identified with it for many years. Okay, this was the colonization movement. This was another type of thing that white people were trying to get rid of us. They did not want us here. Heck, many of them still don't want us here today. If you listen to what a lot of people say, at least they don't want us in their neighborhoods or their communities. They always wanted us separate. This is nothing new, what you're dealing with today. Let's go on to the next. Lincoln's endorsement of colonization in speeches and writings, again, these are documented by Bennett Jr., included support for blacks' resettlement in Central America and, again, a lot of the Caribbean islands. In December of 1862, message to Congress, I think it was 1st of December, he did a congressional Congress where Lincoln strongly supports colonization and for the first time uses the term deportation. It's in congressional records in that message to Congress in which he did. And he asked for money to send people out of this country. It gets even worse. Let's go on to the next. Now, this is a war going on, and you got black men who want to fight for the Union to maintain this country during the Civil War. But this is what Lincoln was doing besides being over the war with the South. He backed several concrete plans, including a scheme to send freed people to, Cherokee region in what is now Panama and New Grenada, and then to Ile Avish, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, and Isle off Haiti. This is where he asked Congress for money, and 450 people were sent to that island off Haiti. It was a disaster. There were 450 people that were sent who took it up, said, you didn't want me, we're gonna go. And I think he asked for about either $300,000 or $600,000 to put this thing together, okay? But of course, it was not put together correctly. They were starving. All the things that they were promised on that island did not come true, and he had to send a ship to get the survivors. Half of them died. This is Lincoln's doing. Half of them died on that island and had to bring them back to America. That's how much of a disaster that plan was. And that was a waste of government money to put this together. This was Lincoln. Let's go on to the next. The December 1862 message to Congress, where Lincoln strongly supported colonization for the first time, again, like I said, used the word deportation. Let's go on to the next. Bennett reading that colonialization was not a passing idea, but central to Lincoln's racial program, persistent late into his presidency. Okay? Almost to the day he died, he was thinking about, what do I do with black people? What do we do? So you know what he would have done if he would lived after the war, if he wasn't assassinated. What do you think would have been the benefit? Would he have backed a lot of the radical Republicans? Those are the ones who fought for black people's rights. If there were going to be any white men that would get any kind of applause for their trying to do this. Those are the ones who came up with the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment, so-called radical republics. Okay, Republicans, and who initiated so that we, at least for the first, from 1865 to 1877, black people had this Reconstruction period, as it was called. It wasn't because of Lincoln's plan, or definitely not Johnson, his vice president, who vetoed a lot of things that's one of the reasons that he was impeached, is because he had vetoed a lot of what the radical Republicans were doing to benefit the ex-enslaved people after the Civil War. Okay, let's go on to the next. Bennett underscored that Lincoln consistently prioritized saving the Union over freeing the enslaved and deferred to border states' slaveholders in shaping early war policies. Okay? This is before the Reconstruction Act, the Confiscation Act, was radical Republicans who were there who wanted to confiscate enslaved people, since we were considered property, to help in destroying the Confederacy, but he was against that. He wanted those border states, which were slave states, that stayed with the Union. Lincoln initially resisted using the war to attack slavery, opposed emancipating and arming enslaved people, and focused on gradual compensated emancipation tied to colonization. He was going to pay the slave owners who owned human beings as property, okay? And on top of that, give the idea of setting these free black men and women out of the country that they'd known and they worked to build. While they were building the White House, the dome of the White House were black men right at that period of time during the Civil War, okay? So all that, he just ignored all the benefits that we've done, the blood, sweat, and tears, and the equivalence of billions of dollars worth of free labor that we, as people of African descent, were non-compensated labor. I don't know how that was gonna work. It was a crazy idea that I think, but this is what he wanted to do, okay? Get rid of us. He was obsessed with that. Let's go on to the next. Public statements where Lincoln says his paramount object is preserving the Union, not free slave, and what he would have the Union with, or he would have the Union with or without emancipation. See, he wasn't the emancipation was just a ploy. He didn't give a dang. He just used it as a War Powers Act. It was not because of the benevolence of his heart, you know, but he would just want to save the Union. He would have it with slavery or without slavery. But if he had it without slavery, he wanted to get rid of the slave. Advocacy of gradual emancipation plans that could extend bondage well into the 20th century, accompanied by colonization proposal. So he would have proposed whatever possible. Let's have a gradual emancipation. Let's do it a little bit at a time that'll extend bondage well into the 20th century. This is what Lincoln was talking about before he was murdered and assassinated. These are the kind of ideas he was coming up with. So that he was not the great emancipator. We were just something in the way that he needed to get rid of. This is what LaRon Bennett wants you to understand, that this glory, this forced into glory that we got down from this mythology going into the 20th century was a lie. The man that we know as Abraham Lincoln was this, not the image that's etched in marbles or in pennies or whatever. It was this individual. This is how he thought, and this is what he wanted to do. And what it would have been like if he was lived into Reconstruction, who knows? But it would have been good for black people. Let's go on to the next. LaRon Bennett argued that the Emancipation Proclamation did not free a single slave, which it did not, because it only applied to Confederate areas outside Union control and exempted enslaved people in loyal or occupied regions where Lincoln actually had power. He had power with those border states. Border states were like the Maryland and Delaware and parts of Missouri that had to be kept in check with troops. Let me get that straight, okay? But there were people that he could have really freed that were slaves in those states, but he did not. So this person, the great emancipator, was really a lie, because the area that he could have freed people, he did not, and the areas that he said the proclamation would cover was already in Confederate hands, and they definitely weren't going to free their enslaved black people. Heck, that's the reason they went to war, to maintain that free labor. So this myth of the Emancipation Proclamation, pretty words, but it did absolutely nothing. Like he said, did not free a single enslaved person. Let's go on to the next. Bennett in this book maintains Lincoln drafted it deliberately to save as much of slavery as he could. He didn't want to get total slavery, portraying it as an intentionally limited conservative measure rather than a revolutionary decree. Okay? He could have freed black people, at least in the border states, that stayed with the Union. But his concern was for the white South. He didn't want to punish them. Radical Republicans wanted to punish them because they betrayed the Union, okay? But he didn't. Let's go on to the next. The proclamation left slavery untouched in border states, like I said, and in Confederate states areas under Union occupation, which meant that enslaved people in those regions remained in bondage by law on January 1st, 1863, which was the time that the proclamation was going to effect on January 1st, 1863. It had no reason. But I must say that it didn't matter to black people. We made sure that it worked with our own feet, okay? Black people in the South left those farms, those plantations. When Union troops came in there, they said, well, it's a law. It was black people who made that law work. The law itself did not have any effect. The only effect that it had was motivating black people and their feet that made it come true. It was black enslaved people leaving those plantations as Union troops, Union armies were going up and down roads in the South and in other areas in the regions in Louisiana, all the way to even some people claimed as far as Texas. Let's go on to the next. Bennett claimed that the real legal emancipating force was not proclamation, but congressional acts like the Second Confiscation Act and ultimately the 13th Amendment. It was those radical Republicans. I said, if you want to give props to white men, it was those radical Republicans like Sumner or Thaddeus Stevenson, those men, but not Lincoln. Lincoln was not for that. He wanted something. He wanted to get rid of us, like I said earlier. Let's go on to the next. Bennett claims that Lincoln used the proclamation in part to head off or dilute the more sweeping emancipation potential of the First and Second Confiscation Act. Those were passed by those radical Republicans in Congress as early as 1862, where they would take the property of these traders and free the property, us, by these acts, which he suggested might otherwise have produced faster and more complete freedom. But that did not work. Lincoln was against that. Let's go on to the next. He maintained that Lincoln remained committed to gradualism, compensation, and colonialization, even as he signed the proclamation, and that he resisted truly revolutionary measures until pushed beyond his preference. He was forced into glory. He was not doing that on his own, like the mythology tells us. Let's go on to the next. Lincoln's hesitation to implement the Confiscation Act aggressively and his attempt to reassure border states and conservative Northerners, white racists in the North, the persistence of proposal tying emancipation to colonialization in Lincoln's correspondence and public messages around 1862 and 1863. This is what he was pushing. Contrary to the Confiscation Act, the First and Second Confiscation Act that was passed by Congress, this is what he was trying to push, okay? Trying to maintain these white. The reason we went to Civil War, I know people say it wasn't slavery. It was about enslavement, okay? And he would rather maintain enslavement than free anybody to maintain the Union. Let's go on to the next. If Lincoln had fully embraced the Confiscation Act, how might emancipation have unfolded differently? This is what Bennett is telling you in this book. I mean, it's a powerful book. Let's go on to the next. Bennett credits abolitionists like I do and radical Republicans, not Lincoln, with driving the process of emancipation, arguing that their agitation whipped Lincoln into signing the proclamation and supporting the 13th Amendment. It was the radical Republican that even made him say, okay, I'll do a proclamation. It didn't come out of any kind of benevolence. He was forced to do it by these radical Republicans. He highlights figures like Wendell Phillips, Charles Sumner, like I said, Owen Lovejoy, Lyman Trumbull, and the true political and as the true engines of the emancipation. These are the men who forced them to produce the Emancipation Proclamation. It didn't come out of any kind of love for black people or some kind of benevolence in Lincoln. He was forced by these men who were on him to do it. And he kicking and screaming. He did that, and he did it in a weak way. It did not free anybody. Let's go on to the next. Okay, evidence and examine. Congressional radicals pushing through the Second Confiscation Act and anti-slavery measures before Lincoln was ready. Abolitionists' critique of Lincoln's slowness and timidity and their pressure on the administration through petitions, speeches, and public campaign. They publicly embarrassed Lincoln. They put things in newspapers. They did speeches. They put petitions out. That's what got him to do the Emancipation Proclamation. He was forced in it. Thus, again, the book Forced into Glory. Let's go on to the next. Bennett used the Count Adam Gorowski comment that Lincoln was literally whipped into the glory of having issued the Emancipation Proclamation. You were not told this in school. It was not something. He was forced into it. He was, like this Count said, Gorowski said, he was literally whipped into the glory of having issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This is the history that you need to know. You got to understand this in order to see the truth of America, in order to understand what you're up against in America. Let's go on to the next. Bennett argued that the de jure emancipation came through the 13th Amendment. Okay, that's the law. Okay, de jure, one with intense pressure from radicals and abolitionists rather than through the Emancipation Proclamation. He portrays Lincoln as late and reluctant in fully endorsing the amendment, suggesting that political necessity, external pressure, not a long-standing abolitionist conviction, explains his support of that proclamation. There's more, but I'm gonna stop here. I have come to the end of this. So you see that if you understand history, then you will understand the present. We're still having to force people to do what is right. But what are they doing? Getting rid of the Voting Rights Act, doing the exact same thing that those people 150 years ago were doing. What has changed? Okay? But I hope I open your eyes to some truth. So until next time, peace, Hotep, bye-bye.